Pretty soon, children are returning to school buildings, and there's heightened anxiety about COVID-19 and the Delta variant. I am Adrienne Lawrence, and this is The Conversation. And this time, I bring you Emily Jones, executive for Racial Justice, United Methodist Women. Thanks for joining us, Emily.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, so people are not necessarily seeing the full scope of the repercussions of bringing children back into schools at this point in time. What is it that you think they need to know?
Yeah, I think it's been a really rough period of time for parents, for kids, for teachers, and so we're all eager to get back to normal. But I think we need to reckon with the fact that normal wasn't perfect, right? That normal wasn't all okay. As United Methodist Women, even pre-pandemic, we were working on interrupting the school to prison pipeline because we were seeing such deeply troubling racial disparities in school discipline really at all levels, from suspension, expulsion, all the way up through to law enforcement, referrals, school-based arrests. So I think we really need to be mindful of the kinds of schools that we want young people to be returning to.
So would we have children returning with the heightened anxiety about COVID-19? How are you going to see it play out in terms of the racial disparity, in terms of how children are treated in institutions?
Yeah, well, the Office of Civil Rights Data Collection Department just came out with some new data about a month and a half ago, and there's a data delay, right? So the data we were looking at was actually from 2017, 2018. But what we saw was that Black children are about 15% of K-12 enrollment, but about 29% of law enforcement referrals, more than 30% of in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, school-based arrests. We also see disparities impacting Native American students, as well as Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students. And we really need to, as a community, be working together to break those trends, right? So we're really doing the work that needs to happen in order to create a change so that we don't return to the same broken patterns that were in place before we entered this 2020, 2021 moment.
Absolutely, and in this moment, do you think that possibly having this Delta variant, all of the things going on in the background, that it's going to aggravate the current system? And if so, how do you forecast it will aggravate the system?
Right, well, so I don't have a crystal ball, and I'll be frank that I could not have predicted the events of the last 2 years. So I want to be humble about what I don't know. But I will say that young people have been experiencing a lot of stress and strain, the social emotional burden of isolation, of anxiety, of grief, as folks have watched loved ones die, as folks are in the process of trying to figure out what it means to reacclimate to in-person schooling, in some cases for the first time in about a year and a half. We would hope that students would be returning to schools that had supports in place, right? Schools that were really equipped with grace, right? To use faith language. I come from a faith tradition. But unfortunately, a lot of schools have really hardened, right? So increasingly we have schools that have school resource officers in place, school-based police, but don't have counselors, don't have nurses, don't have social workers. And that hardening that has been taking place over not just the past few years, but decades at this point has really not set us up to meet this moment well. So it's a cause for concern.
Absolutely, and just speculating here, but if we know that Black and brown students are being policed at greater rates and also being removed from schools at greater rates, and also we know that teachers, educators, that they are all on a heightened anxiety level, I would assume that their response time, how they address things, are now going to be at that heightened anxiety level. And thus we are probably going to see even more instances of people being policed and essentially burdened even more and removed from a system that we've already been delayed and set back because of COVID-19 and the quarantine periods that went on last year and kids not being able to be in schools.
Absolutely. We see implicit bias, systemic racism, the dynamics that have been in place for so long have not gotten better over the last year and a half. There is still much work to be done. And until we really do that work, until we wrestle deeply, we won't be able to invite schools back into environments that are as safe and loving and supportive as we need them to be for our young people.
Yes, absolutely, because we definitely do need to improve on the system as it currently stands, and we know it's at a deficit, and to an incredible extent right now, especially as we're seeing governors, state leaders, essentially getting into kind of heated debates, fights with educators, and whether there will be masks, will not be masks. But in terms of the racial justice angle, we also know that that individuals are struggling to necessarily get the attention that they need. I believe it was the Florida governor, DeSantis, who is offering vouchers. I believe that was him for students who did not want to wear masks. And that's essentially going to move us back into private schools. I guess, how do you see the consequences of these kind of things playing out, hopefully someday post COVID-19?
Well, again, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't predict the future. But I do think that we're at an inflection point where we can make different choices, right? We do not need to stay in the same patterns that we've been in for years and years, right? I work with a faith-based organization. I work with a Christian organization, a group of women of faith around the country. And I really believe that we are able to change, that we are able to do better, that we are able to learn from our mistakes. But we have to be willing to do that. We have to embrace that. We can't double down on failed policies and expect different results.
Yes, without question, doubling down on those failed policies will not get us anywhere. And I also do understand that there has been rises in physical abuse at home, in part because of COVID-19, the heightened anxiety, and because people are abusers, and now having children at home during the day and whatnot, that you essentially, they don't have their safe havens anymore because they're not able necessarily to go back to schools. If you do have some thought or insight on how, I guess, that is going to be addressed or can be addressed, or what your organization, United Methodist Women, is doing, please do share.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so let me just point out an incredible learning resource. So over this summer, our members, United Methodist Women all across the country, thousands of members from all states, were gathering together to really study and reflect and use this moment to deepen our understanding. And we were reading this really powerful book together by Dr. Monique Morris, Push Out the Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools. And I'd really invite everyone, if you haven't yet engaged with that text, to please do so, because it includes such powerful voices of young people speaking out about what they need and what schools that really foster deep safety and loving environments might look like. So I'd recommend continued learning it, and that is a resource. And then I'd also point us towards action, right? As United Methodist Women, we are committed to not only learning and growing in faith, but also creating a change in the world around us. And a couple ways that you can do that. First is to take action locally, of course, in your own school and with the young people who are in your own life. But a second way is really to try and shift policy. And a couple bills that I would flag that are currently pending federal and in need of advocacy, the Ending Push Out Act, as well as the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act, both of which would help us shift away from these failed policies, right? An over-reliance on police in schools, right? A system in which we are criminalizing children of color, and instead move towards holistic, loving supports, right? Echoing the call that young people have been making for so long to move towards counselors, not cops, right? To move towards police-free schools. So I think that we can continue to grow, we can continue to learn, we can continue to deepen our understanding and listening to young people, and we can also be advocating for policy change, both at that federal level and also state and locally.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be a very powerful thing. I really do support that as well, moving away from cops and more toward counselors. And I assume that this is also something that is wrapped in the kind of the defund the police movement, in terms of not pouring resources into law enforcement, particularly in educational institutions when you're dealing with younger people. And let's move toward counseling and actually mentorship and growth. Is that something that the United Methodist Women is looking to promote?
So I think what we're really invested in is creating systems that work for young people, right? As an organization, we've been around for more than 150 years. And of course, the language of interrupting the school to prison pipeline is much newer than that. But for us, it comes out of a really long-standing commitment to supporting, putting faith, hope, and love in action for women, children, and youth, to changing the conditions for young people and to addressing racial justice. And at this point, the over-reliance on policing, right? way that we are continuing to harden schools so that young people are met not with supportive professionals trained in trauma-informed care and child development, but instead policing. That is a system that is set up to criminalize, right? That is not an effective approach. And so we really want to see that change. We want to see schools move in a direction of transformative justice, restorative justice, wraparound support services, be places that, again, we come from this from a faith-based place. So be places of grace, right? Be places of love, be places in which the grace that is extended to white children is also extended to Black children, Native children, children of color. That I think is our call, and that has been our call in a long-term way, and will be until we see the change that is needed.
Awesome, I fully support that. Thank you so much, Emily Jones, Executive for Racial Justice, United Methodist Women.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.